Welcome, welcome, welcome. After a big lunch, I got to keep you all from falling asleep here. Don't want to lose any of you. Today we're tackling evolution in the human family. That's what the new kids are all about. They are that quantum leap in evolution we all knew that was coming. Guess what? They're here. In fact, they've been here for a while. So I want to lay just a little bit of groundwork with what we're now finding in genome research, haplotypes or your blood type groups, your DNA. What our new researchers are finding out is literally turning upside down what we thought we knew about the human family, immigrations, who settled where, the various cultures. And it's really challenging us in ways that sometimes is quite uncomfortable. But I think it's really exciting. So I'm going to be going over a lot of research here. Later on, we're going to be looking at some plates. First of all, I want to invite you to realize that right now today, half of the population in all of the Arabic countries is under the age of 25. So we're looking at a massive amount of people who are all young. So what's growing up and being the leaders and the government and the politics in these countries are really unexperienced people. So let's just kind of let that hang. I'll come back to it later on. But just be advised that populations even in Europe, Japan, are dwindling. They're not dwindling in the United States because we're still bringing in a lot of immigrants. Our people here are still producing. So our populations are not dwindling that much. But in other countries like Russia, Europe, Scandinavia, Japan, that's becoming an issue. We used to think, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we lower the population rate, if the population rate goes down? Well, yes, it's wonderful to a point. But that point is who's going to finance the older generation as they advance in age? You know, all of a sudden we don't have the young ones there to finance things like Social Security or our universal health care, these kinds of things. So some of the countries are beginning to feel a little bit of a pinch. But, you know, we all know, at least I think you all know, that our roots all go back to Africa. Everybody's roots go back to Africa. We know that. With the exception of one blood type, and that's called the X haplotype. Haplotype is blood type. The X haplotype are just X and then haplotype. Now, the X haplotype our scientists cannot find an origin. They can find an origin on all the rest of us. We all go back to Africa. But who originated the X haplotype? There aren't that many. They're kind of rare, but they exist. And they're a scientific puzzle. What we find with the X haplotype is they populate the Basque lands, the lands of the Basque. They populate, well, to somewhat, the lands of the Berbers. They populate certain regions on this earth. They populate, see if I can give you, here it is. The Great Lakes mound builders, the Iroquois, the Yakima, the Sioux, the Ojibwe, the Navajo, the Algonquin, and the Picts of Iran. A lot of the Iranian people. Find them a little bit in Egypt too, but these are the main countries, especially in Iran and especially in the land of the Basque. These X haplotypes are rare, they're unique, they are a different kind of people. They don't match the rest of us. They're different. And the very areas that they populate, that their remnants still remain, are the exact same areas that Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, said all of the people fleeing the sinking of Atlantis, these are the areas they fled to. So we've got, perhaps, verification of some of the Cayce readings that this X haplotype doesn't fit anywhere. Who originated them? Where did they come from? They did not come from Africa. Well, where did the Atlanteans come from? So it's this kind of rethinking that our new testing invites us to do. For instance, in the Yucatan, when we're talking about the Mayans, 60 to 65% of the Mayans are Chinese. It's another one of those little oops. Most of the Incas were Chinese. The Chinese footprints, in fact, are all over South America and Central America and even into the United States. It is the Chinese who claim, and it is now being verified with evidence, that they're the ones who discovered America. There is a book out now called, let's see, what is it called? 1421, the year China discovered America. And there's a lot of evidence now to suggest that this may indeed be true. That the Chinese were the original and the great explorers. We also know, through our new genetic and genome research, that if you consider yourself to be Scottish, anybody here consider themselves to be Scottish? Well, you're probably Egyptian. The word Scot comes from Scotta, which was an Egyptian princess who took hundreds and hundreds of people, great fleets of people, up to and settled in Scotland. And Scotland is named for her. In Northern Ireland, there are villages up there that still maintain the old relics, the customs, and the language of Egypt. So a lot of the Irish are Egyptians, and predominantly the Scots are Egyptian. So, you know, it's really interesting to get into this fascinating kind of research. But what is even more puzzling even is what I'm about to give you. Now, this is all science, has nothing to do with anybody's channeling. This is just nothing but science. The female gender goes back about 150,000 to 250,000 years ago. Got that? The female gender. The male gender, however, only goes back to 60,000 to 100,000 years ago. We have 150,000 years of history where we cannot trace any male in the human family. They're not there. How did we reproduce? Was it all the female? Did they have cloning? I don't think so. What we're finding now, just recently, if you've been reading your headlines in the last month, they have, what is it, a shark or some kind of fish, female fish that is hatching out, having babies, and there's no evidence of a male. We know in science this can be done even in the human family. You've heard of the virgin birth. It is real. There are records of females who were impregnated and gave birth, and no evidence of a male sperm at all, male semen at all. Doesn't happen very often, very rare, but it can happen. So our scientists are now challenging us in ways that really stretch our mind. Maybe the days of the great goddess were the days of great goddesses because there were no gods around. You know, it just kind of makes you wonder how all that fit and how it all worked. Well, now that I've teased you a little bit with science, let's go a little bit more with science. At least in recognizing that there are new kids on the block. That the human species, the human family, is now making a quantum leap in its evolutionary pattern. Some people label the new kids indigos or crystals or crystalline or transitionals or cosmic or psychic or, you know, there's all kinds of labels. Starseeds, indeed, and star children. Take all of those labels that you've heard about. Please toss them. Then take all of the characteristics that are listed for each one of those. Bunch them all together. And you have the profile of the new kids. What we're finding today is that the individual labels pigeonhole or box the kids into exclusive clubs of specialness that cause more harm than good. If you want to continue using them, fine, that's your decision. I'm just inviting you to entertain the fact that they're much bigger than that. It's an inclusive rise in the human family. Everybody is rising in the human family. Edgar Cayce once said, "Great numbers of children will be born who understand electronics and atomic power, as well as other forms of energy. They will grow into scientists and engineers of a new age, which has the power to destroy civilization unless we learn to live by spiritual laws." Let's take a look at some of the talents and characteristics of the new kids, and then we'll take a look at some of their weaknesses. These children are intelligent. I don't care if they're flunking in school and can't spell. These kids are smart. They're smart children. Let me give you an idea of how smart. In the IQ test, standard IQ tests that are administered in those countries that do this sort of thing, about 5 years ago, they discovered that standard IQ test, there's a sudden spike in intelligence. There's a sudden spike in scores. And when I say spike, I mean spike. It's within a few years. It just spike. They are finding now that about 1/3 of the kids worldwide who take these tests, so I'm not talking United States here, I'm talking about 1/3 of the children who just take these tests globally, those countries that administer the tests, are now scoring between 150 to 160. Now, some teachers say that the score for genius is between about 134 to 136, and other teachers say, no, the score begins at 140. This is 1/3 of the children globally who take the standard IQ test are scoring now between 150 to 160 with no genetic markers to account for it. And there's a puzzle that goes with that. And the puzzle is the greatest jump in intelligence is non-verbal. This is what we call creative problem solving, abstracting. If I were to be asked what is the greatest skill and what is the greatest talent of today's children, without hesitation I would say it is the ability to abstract. These children don't just think outside the box. They don't even recognize there was a box there to begin with. They're abstracting from when they first learn to talk. You get these little bitty kids, 1.5 old, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, and they're abstracting. They're dealing with concepts already. Let me give you an example. 2.5-year-old Michaela She was in a discussion with her mother. And she became very frustrated. By the way, they're easy to frustrate. Put her hands on her hips and walked up to her mother and wiggled her finger in front of her mother's face and said, "I don't know the word for that yet." Now, how does a 2.5-year-old know they don't know the word for that yet? That's abstraction. They're dealing with abstracts at a very, very, very early age. As far as I'm concerned, they're born with it. I told you a little bit about what I found last night with children and near-death experiences. Very, very similar. Although the children with near-death experiences seem to have an even greater jump in intelligence, and more of them. These new kids are music-oriented. Have you ever seen teenagers or the young kids walking down the block and, the iPod's over here, and here's the big cord, and they're listening? Yeah, always very, very music-oriented. It's almost as if they prefer music to food. They're very clever innovators. They are inventors. They're very creative, extremely creative. They're very intuitive. They're very psychic. Most of them can remember the past, and many of them remember lifetimes in other places besides what we call planet Earth. And don't think it's other planets. Many of them remember having lives as part of an asteroid or a scalar wave or some kind of bits and pieces of the universe. They do not necessarily remember being in human form ever or at all. And that they came to planet Earth to answer an SOS call that planet Earth was putting out. They came here to help the Earth. And you find in the Great Shifting, this is a very interesting branch of kids. You want to read about it. It's in my book, The New Children and Near-Death Experiences. Very different type of child that doesn't necessarily remember being from Orion or Sirius or Mercury. They remember being a scalar wave or a bit or piece of an asteroid. Very different kinds of kids. They're excellent with math. Most of them are very good with math. Very often they approach math a little differently than the rest of us, but they're good with math. They're natural-born healers. They don't know why or how. They just know they need to do this. They'll walk up to someone and say, well, you need more of a certain color, and they'll send that color to them. Or you need more of a certain sound. They'll send that sound to them. Or they just simply need to touch that individual in a certain way at that time. They're natural-born healers. They're also natural-born entrepreneurs. I don't know if you've been watching the headlines lately in the newspapers. I have. We've got little kids at the age of 5 that have an idea about a product. They start making it in their bedroom. Many of these kids have access to the internet, and they'll sell it on the internet. By the time they're maybe between 12 years old or 15 years old, they've paid for their schooling. It's incredible. There is a website just for kids by kids that teaches them about trademarks, copyrights, financing, how you set all this up, and how you have your own business if you have your parents' permission to run it out of your bedroom, that kind of thing. It's www.bkfk.com. So it's by kids for kids, www.bkfk.com. So if you've got one of these youngsters, get them on that website so they'll learn all the do's and don'ts and marketing skills and financial skills they're going to need to know in copywriting their invention or trademarking it and getting it out there. It's just amazing what these kids are doing. They feel very entitled, by the way. They feel that the world owes them. There's a little bit of that me generation in them. They're very irreverent. They don't look at belief or knowing or religion or spirituality like you do, or insight. They kind of cock their head a little bit funny and wonder what's the matter with you. They're very volunteer-minded, humanitarian projects. Remember that boy in Canada? I forget his name. What was he, about 4 or 5 years old? And he was watching a documentary on Canada about people in Africa, and they didn't have clean water. They were unable to drill and get the clean water. He was so disturbed by that he took his savings, all of his little pennies, and he went around to the neighborhood and got more pennies and more dimes and more nickels and more dollars, and told his parents that we have to drill more water wells in Africa. So he got more people involved, got on the radio, got on TV, and the next thing you know, this little bitty kid had raised over $1 million, and his parents and he flew to Africa, and this one village where they were able to sink a well and bring in clear water, the villagers all honored this little boy, and he was so affected by how grateful the people in Africa were to have clean water, that he has gone on and on to raise more money and more money. I don't know how many wells this boy has financed today. He's now in his teens, I believe his early teens, thousands of wells. This one little boy decided that he was going to help the people in Africa have clean water. Now, he's not an exception. You're hearing more and more and more of these children. These children don't wait to be inspired. They don't wait for your permission. They're not into belief. They're into doing. They're going to get right up off their fannies and they're going to go do it. Sometimes with or without your permission. You might have to kind of watch that. They have spatial abilities. This is the problem with the schools. I don't know how many you here are teachers or volunteers in the school system, but our school curriculums are set up to be 80% verbal. The new kids are 80% spatial. We're losing them right now. We're losing them in the school systems. They're bored. They're bored silly. Did you know that the people who created the internet were spatial learners? They were all spatial. They were able to create a spatial network, which we today call the internet. These kids are like them. They're all like them. They're spatial. That's why they love video games. That's why they love anything pictorial or anything that will challenge the pictures in their own mind. They're groupies. Goodbye, John Wayne. These are groupies. They like to do things in groups. They are multisensory. They live in a multiverse. And they are multi-channelers. Most of us here are acquainted with a universe. We know about the universe. These kids know about multiverses. They're not just interested in the universe. They're interested in all kinds of universes, on all kinds of different levels. Before I talk any more about their abilities, and I will, I want to bring you up to date with the latest in, with the latest in findings about the human brain, and then I want to talk about the latest findings in schools. First of all, the latest findings about the brain. Remember, we now have new scientists who are exploring in new ways. There are 2 gene mutations that build a better brain. They've been around for a little while. They're not old, but they've been around for a little while. Scientists now tell us that today, 70% of the world's population has one of these gene mutations. In other words, most of the people on the planet are smarter than they used to be. They're smarter than the people even in the 1800s, even in the early 1900s. The scientists also tell us that about 30%, almost 1/3 of the population, have both of them. Now, isn't it interesting that what we're finding with standard IQ tests, 1/3 of the people, geniuses, and about 1/3 of the people have both of the gene mutations. It's going in thirds. About 1/3 of the human family is rising above and beyond what we're prepared to handle as societies. And it's these gene mutations. Let's talk just a little bit about schooling, and I'll come back to it later. This was just published in about February this year, I believe. And what they're finding in other countries, especially England, but they're also now finding it in the United States. Remember I said I really truly feel that their greatest talent is the ability to abstract. And they're finding now that by the time the child is puberty, so that's about 12, 13, they're losing the ability to abstract. They're losing it. And by the time they're in high school, what we're finding, what we're getting in all too many schools are educated, brilliant idiots. They know a lot. They're being trained to pass tests and to meet standards, but they can't reason anymore and they can't abstract anymore. What do you think is the culprit of they're finding one half of the kids in school are losing the ability to abstract by puberty. I'm asking you, what do you think is the culprit? Video games, that's part of it.
I noticed that the American Indian tribe said when the next mandate gave vaccination to the children, they lost their psychic ability the next day.
Okay.
The other part is the school system stuff. I think it's food.
Okay. None of you have got it. Yes. What? Structure of the school. No. I'm going to shock you all. What's doing it is virtual realities. On your cell phones, on your cell phones, on your video games, on your television, on your DVDs, on your movies, on your computers, any kind of virtual reality. Do you know why? It directly interferes with brain development. Any kind of virtual reality, I don't care what it is, directly interferes with brain development. The brain is so designed that it learns best by participating. It has to touch the dog, not see a picture of the dog. You get the difference here. The brain is set up to learn from personal experience. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that the child can't be exposed to virtual realities. They can. It's the overloading of it. too much of it. Maybe an hour a day when they're little bitty, maybe 2 hours, maybe 3. Be careful how much exposure they get until they're about puberty. From then on, they seem to be able to handle more of it because the brain then is better able to handle it. So guess what Walt Disney did? Walt Disney has now developed a television channel just for toddlers. And it was started this year. And the parents are thrilled because they think it's going to give their children one-upmanship with intelligence. Because the kids are going to be starting at the age of 1 or 1.5 or maybe 8 months of age. And they're going to be exposed to this wonderful world. And they're going to be taught how to do these wonderful things at these tiny little ages. And they don't realize that they're short-circuiting the brain in a way that the backlash years later will be that the child has lost the ability to reason. This is a big one. This, unfortunately, is not in my book, Beyond the Indigo Children, because it just came out. Please know, this talk, by the way, is based on the book, Beyond the Indigo Children. Most of it's in the book, but not all of it. Please know that book is constantly updated, or updated from time to time on my website, in the little ebook called Beyond the Indigo Children Extras. So your facts and your references are in the extras, not in the book itself, because a lot of this science came out after the book was published. So, what are you going to do? Well, I update it on my website. That's what I do. And your name, address, phone numbers, and everything you need is there for all kinds of incredible things that you really need to know. Let's take a look at some of the downsides, some of the weaknesses these kids have. We all have weaknesses, so do the new kids. They are the quick click kids. They expect everything right now. Have you noticed that? They don't have a lot of patience. Well, maybe in some areas, but they tend to get frustrated very quickly. They have the genetic marker, or I should say the generational marker for anger. And it's really interesting, that anger. It's not what you would normally think of as anger. It's the kind of anger that gets very frustrated at anything inauthentic, overly exaggerated, or untrue. They don't have a lot of patience for that kind of stuff. They tend to just knock it to one side and move on. They don't want to fool around with that. You've heard of rugrat rage and all these angry kids. Well, it's really impatience with anything that's inauthentic. Well, look around at our society, the movies, the parents, our movie stars, our sports stars. Are they inauthentic? Many of them are. And then look at that and they just kick it. They prefer the astral. That's why I'm really recommending for any of these kids, and it just came in yesterday, is Goddess Runes. This is my newest book, and the CD with the shamanic meditation and all kinds of wonderful things, and the runes themselves. These are not Futhark. These are not the runes you're used to. These are the old ancient elder runes that go back 12,000 years or more. This is a historical set. It does not enhance the right brain. It enhances right and left brain together. It is a whole brain system. And this is what the kids love as per the astral. Don't just give them the spooky stuff or the fun stuff or the little people or all of that. Give them something that encourages whole brain development. And they have a few of them here for sale if you're interested in that kind of thing. But whatever will help with the astral. Those of you who are teachers, who are psychics, who are channelers, who work with people, please help these kids deal with possessions and attachments. They get them easily and quickly. They don't know how to get rid of them. They don't know what they are. So teach them psychic self-defense. Teach them 1-minute meditation. You know, a little kid can do a 1-minute meditation. There's a wonderful guided visualization at toward the end of the book, Beyond the Indigo Children. Let's teach these kids. They need a little motivation, but what they need is a lot of guidance. And that's who we are as parents and elders. We're really their guides. And they need to know how to clear and cleanse past life memories, past life trauma, past life emotions. They really need you very much. They need a safe place where they can talk about it, where they can deal with it. Now, these new kids are not into processing. So that's going to slip you up right now. They're not into processing. That's why we've got so many of them that are stealing music off the internet. They don't understand copyrights. They don't understand trademarks. I mean, what is that stuff? If I want it, I'll get it right now. Got it. I didn't have to earn it. You see, they don't understand that link between the idea, the creativity, refining your skill over time, maybe going to a college or school, earning a degree, and eventually being that refined individual who is trained and knows what they're doing. They don't understand that process. They don't understand any type of processing. So this is where you're going to be challenged in reaching these kids and reaching them in a way that they can follow. They love to be bargained with. You know, sometimes you can bargain them. But you won't get them the way that your parents probably got you. Oh, they love night school. Have you discovered that yet? They prefer night school. Do you know what night school is? I didn't. I thought it was just kids going to sleep and dreaming great dreams, or maybe they had an overactive imagination. Well, I got my comeuppance one day when I was in a shopping center. It was a large one, and there was a mom and her little boy over here. He was about, maybe 5 or 6. And way down the hall was a mom and dad and another little boy, about the same age. And these two boys called each other by name, went running across the hall to each other. I was there. I heard this stuff going on. And they were talking about their assignments they got last night in night school. The assignment that was given to them by their teacher that they were supposed to do during the daytime. And they were talking about their other classmates, different sizes and shapes of beings, not necessarily looking like people. And they were all attending night school together. Well, I thought, this is rather peculiar. But then I discovered that the woman to my right was local. The little boy was local. But the other little boy and his parents were tourists. They were just passing through. They'd never been there before. The night school is real. It's on grids and matrices that are substantial. They exist in the ethers. If you know anything about shamanism, if you know anything about exploring other dimensions, you know about grids and matrices. And these kids are so good they can create their own grids. If there isn't a grid there, they'll create their own. And these grids and matrices exist in the ethers. They are real. And these kids know all about them. You don't have to teach them about grids. They are highly sensitive to drugs, snack foods, and processed foods, electromagnetic fields, toxic metals, and toxic foods. Of course, most people are to that. But they do not assimilate nutrition well. A lot of these kids who are raised in families that have only organic food, They're very, very careful with their diets, still are having problems assimilating those foods. And it's because they overall, on the average, simply do not assimilate food well. Many of them have problems or challenges with the intestinal system. You might want to go to some really good homeopaths or naturopaths or various other types of doctors who are able to explore this and find out what's going on with the food. What we're finding out now is a lot of the children are allergic. And they're allergic to the kinds of foods we weren't ever allergic to, like wheat, like milk, like different types of food that just blew my mind. I mean, we never hesitated with flowers before. Well, do you realize what they're spraying wheat with now? And it gets into the kernel, and it then stays in that kernel and becomes part of the flour, becomes part of the grain that we're feeding our children. They're super sensitive to this kind of thing, and they're being challenged by it in major ways. Very much the fusion of the sexes, or the mixing or the coming together of the sexes now. Very much the fusion of the sexes. This has been predicted, by the way, in prophecy, that during this time in our history, polarities now begin to merge. And what we're finding with these new kids, well, you're finding it in your newspapers anyway, far more to do with homosexuality and lesbianism than ever has before. More hermaphrodites being born. These are kids with both sexual systems being born now than ever before. Last year, in a special documentary that was done on NBC by Katie Couric, she was early last year, I think it was about January, February of 2006. She was taking a look at sexuality in the schools. And what she found nationwide is about 40 to 42% of the children today are bisexual. So we're coming closer and closer to that merging of the sexes, what they call the fusion of the sexes. The kids today don't look at male and femalism as we do. They don't look at sex as we do. They don't look at intercourse as we do. They look at it all very, very differently. Even in school, even in the bathrooms at school, even starting in grade school. I think you would be very surprised to know what the children are doing today. I know I was. They're very big into body manipulations, tattoos, and piercings. Very big into implants in the body so that you look a little bit different. Think in terms of Star Trek and some of the different kinds of beings on the Star Trek. Kids are now even going for surgery so they can look more like some of these beings. Some of them are even splitting their tongues. And the first one of those I saw, I got a little sick to my stomach, but now I'm a little more tolerant. They have a different appreciation and understanding of the human body. They have a different understanding of how to express themselves. They're very tribal in that sense. It's sort of, in that sense, going back to the tribal understanding or preference to tattoos and piercings and implants. So a lot of them are doing that. I've already mentioned they don't understand processing and time. These kids operate on nanoseconds, not years or months or an hour. It's a nanosecond. They expect things to come to them. They do not recognize boundaries. It's as if they have no skin. There's no such thing as a boundary. Well, before I go a little further into these new kids, I want to sort of put things in place about this idea of evolution, the idea about the new children, I placed the big flood of the new kids coming in at around 1982. But I want to clarify that. These particular kind of people started coming in about the time of Jesus. You can trace it back that far. There weren't that many, but they were coming in. In all of the renaissances that we've had on this planet, in any different continent or country, clusters and groups of the new kids came in. In fact, most of the people in the renaissances that caused the Renaissance itself were the new kids. Then we saw another big entry of them of about 1870. From about 1870 to 1921, we saw another big, huge entry of the new kids coming into the earth plane. Then again in the 60s, 1960s, 1970s, but the floodgates opened wide at about 1982. I'll show you why when we get into the plates a little bit later on. And I don't think those floodgates, in fact, I know those floodgates are never going to close. Ladies and gentlemen, we are looking at us. We are looking at where we're headed. We are looking at who we are. And I venture to say that a lot of you in the audience right now are the new kids. Right. You've been around for a while. Probably your great-grandpa was one of the new kids. We've been around for a while. But now there's more of us. Now there are millions upon millions of us, and we are evolving even more and even higher. Do you realize now why we get a little caught when we use phrases like indigos or phrases like crystals? Do you see why that's insignificant? It doesn't even begin to cover what's happening with these children today. What these kids face. And I think this is going to be a shocker. You may know some of it, but I doubt if you know it all. Well, whoever knows it all. But I doubt that you know more of it. 2 out of every 5 have a learning disorder. 70% of those are boys. It is the male gender worldwide that is being affected the most by the changes that are coming in. The great shifting is affecting the male gender more than the female gender, and affecting them in substantial ways. 1 out of every 10 are mentally ill. Over 7 million have ADD. Cases of ADHD are up 600% since about 1990, 1991. Autism spectrum is now so pervasive it is considered an epidemic. There has been no long-term study ever done on the drugs we are now administering to our children. Kids are medicated at the same rate as adults are. The insurance industry gives incentives for drugs, disincentives for therapy. We know that DNA is changing. DNA always changes. It's constantly changing according to your environment, what is needed, what's going on, whether that environment is in your head and your attitudes, or whether that environment is where you're living. It doesn't matter whether the environment is inner or outer. The DNA will always shift. And it can shift rather quickly to meet the needs of the environment. We know now that DNA is the world's best communicator. It is always communicating with its environment. Right now, sitting in these chairs, your DNA is going yakety, 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 yak. You know, it is communicating with every other being in this room. It is communicating with all that's going on outside this hotel. It is communicating always. So DNA across the globe is communicating with DNA across the globe. It is the most incredible, powerful communication system on this planet. It is always communicating. And it will shift or change according to need. Having said that, I want to tell you a little story. This goes back about 40,000 years ago. About 40,000 years ago, the human race was faced with what is called a crash or a crunch. That is to say, the human race was faced with extinction. There was very serious weather changes, earth changes, lots of different types of disease, things that were going on, but most of it was the outer environment. The human race was faced with extinction, utter extinction. DNA, being true to its job, suddenly mutated. There was a mutation that occurred in the human race that saved the human race. Without that gene mutation, none of us would be in this room today. Probably none of us would be on the planet today. One single gene mutation saved the human race. Oh, don't you love this pause? It is the gene for ADHD. You would not be alive if it were not for ADHD, the hunter's gene. There has been a 600% jump in ADHD since 1990, 1991. ADHD only exists in the human family in any large extent when the human family needs it. All the rest of the time it's quiescent in the family genes. We don't see much of it. It only rises when there's a lot of wars, a lot of decimation of the population, a lot of starvation, a lot of weather changes, earth changes. It's the only time it's present in large amounts in the human population. It's been very quiet for quite a while. We haven't seen hardly any ADHD. It has nothing to do with reportings. It just wasn't there. 600% jump since 1990, 1991. It is still jumping. I am saying to you, does Mother Nature know something we don't? Stop and think about that. It's just incredible what's happening now with its peaking. You know, in prophecy, they say the new kids are here to return us to the natural order. They say that the new kids represent the fact or represent the knowing that we all know what's right. The new kids know that we all know what's right. They are here to return us to the awareness of consequences. They are here to focus on living with other people who are not like you. The diversity of cultures and people and races. They are here to say, we all make mistakes, admit it, apologize, correct it, move on. The new kids are not into guilt. The new kids are not into shame. If you're into guilt and you're into shame, that's not part of the new kid credo. The new kids say our intention is who we are. You do not have to defend who you really are. Life is about focus, who we are inside, our intention. And the kids know there's no free passes. They are leading us beyond polarity. They are helping us to learn how to deal with holons. H-O-L-O-N. Let me teach you about holons. A holon is a condition where you have conflicting forces, opposing forces, who come together and work together to accomplish something that benefits for the better the whole. So you've got conflicting forces that come together and work together to benefit the whole. You don't try to change the conflicting forces. The people over here versus the people over there. You're not a missionary. They're not into missionaryhood. You take the people where they are and present them with projects whereby they can work together to accomplish a given whole. The holon. They're working for the whole or the holon. And interestingly enough, when they start working together and start talking together and dealing with each other, they find out, oh, well, that guy isn't so bad after all. Oh, well, that belief system isn't what I thought it was. You see, they find out about each other in the more abstract manner. Not directly, but abstract, working with holons. I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, a few years ago, and the people there practice holons. I got my comeuppance. I got my spiritual comeuppance in Istanbul. You've got fundamentalist Muslims living next door to fundamentalist Jews, living next door to fundamentalist Christians, living next door to fundamentalist Buddhists and pagans, and on and on and on. And they get along. They respect each other. They may not like each other, but they respect each other. And one Muslim fellow got up one day and had a vision, and he said, we're going to turn the Bosphorus blue again. The Bosphorus Straits water was like dirt sludge with the big tankers, you know, making their way down from Russia with a big, you know, cargo of oil and all kinds of stuff. And over the years, the Bosphorus had turned not just mud-like, but sludge-like. And he had this idea that we can make it blue again. And in just a few years, all these people got together, worked on the single project of turning the Bosphorus blue. And let me tell you, it's as blue as the bluest eyes. It's the sapphire blue. You can swim in the Bosphorus today. You can eat fish out of the Bosphorus today. It is healthy. It is wonderful. They did it. It didn't change the people. The fundamentalist Muslim is still a fundamentalist Muslim. But they're smiling, and they work together, and they respect each other because they created a holon. You see how holons work? These kids are leading us beyond polarity. What they're finding out in some of the schools, especially in England, especially in Australia, and those of you who have been to Australia or, you know, speak at all or email at all with people in Australia, especially Perth, Australia. They're doing things right now in the school system that is making a fundamental difference, and it's simple things. What they found in Australia, the teachers there, now these are ordinary teachers. Are you with me? Ordinary, trained, natural, normal school teachers. They got sick and tired of these kids and their intuition. Because the kids were talking to each other. They had no idea what they were saying. They were talking room to room. They had no idea what they were saying because it's all mind to mind. And they were good at it, and the teachers were so frustrated. They had to do something to stop the telepathy. They did it by inviting the children to whisper. So the kids didn't have to talk out loud anymore, or necessarily through telepathy. They would just whisper to each other, and they're groupies anyway, and they loved it. So they whispered. There's always this tone of whispering. There's no such thing as a silent class anymore. The new kids, by the way, don't like silence, most of them. So they're very comfortable with this whispering tone that's going on in the classrooms. By the way, they don't call them classrooms anymore. They're now neighborhoods. They don't call the teachers teachers anymore. They're now guides. They no longer have solid walls in the classrooms. They're all movable walls so that the kids can change the walls several times a day if they want to. They can move the walls around. This made a difference in scores, improved scores, in excess of 80%. Not only are they doing well, they are thriving in the classroom. And that's all they did. That's all they did. We need to learn from that. We need to learn what other countries are doing that's working. These kids, most of them have electrical sensitivity. They pop light bulbs, if you haven't discovered that already. They are creating a parallel world to this one. Most of them are sick and tired of adults doing things the way adults do, and politicians and corporate executives and all this other stuff. So they're creating a world parallel to this one. They don't care if you're in it or not. That's up to you. But they're doing it. And they're doing it through green. Anything that's green, that's a key word now that used to depict the sustainability movement. Sustainable architecture, sustainable food, sustainable buildings. This route is where they're going. Bioengineering. There's a lot of references to bioengineering in the book Beyond the Indigo Children. I don't know if you've caught on yet, but the notes section in the back of the book, notes, footnotes, is literally a resource section. Again, name, address, phone number. I respect people who read my books. I do the best job I can to give you places to go, people to talk to, books to read, ideas to explore that get you beyond these into these concepts and beyond them. Let's see, what else do I want to mention here? Oh, yes, wonderful books. Please, if you're an educator or if you have contact with an educator, recommend these two books. You want Upside Down Brilliance by Dr. Linda Silverman. The Silver and then M-A-N. Dr. Linda Silverman. She is an expert on gifted learning. And of course, she is very much recognizing that the new kids, most of them are spatial learners. And Upside Down Brilliance teaches you about that and how to educate a spatial learner. So get it into your school systems. Introduce your administrators to that. The next book is Little Big Minds. It's the name of the book, Little Big Minds. Just came out. The author is Marietta McCarty. Big M, little c, big C, A-R-T-Y. Marietta McCarty. I've been following her work now for over a decade. She's been teaching philosophy in grade school. And she's discovered that the younger the child in grade school, the better the candidate they are for teaching philosophy. She says, especially 3rd or 4th grade and on, get philosophy into the grade schools. The kids have incredible concepts. Remember, abstract learners. They have incredible concepts of life and death, of people being shot up in class, about what's happening to families and what we can do about it. These kids are ahead of us in knowing solutions. So let's get these people who are credentialed, like Marietta McCarty, let's get their books into the schools and into the hands of educators. If you want the spirituality of children, which is just mind-boggling, get the book, The Secret Spiritual Life of Children. It's by Dr. Tobin Hart, H-A-R-T. Tobin, T-O-B-I-N, Dr. Tobin Hart. There has never been a better book written on spirituality for the average person, and especially for children and parents, than Tobin's book. There is not a better one on the market. I don't care what country you're in. The Secret Spiritual Life of Children. I want to make a point before I get into the root races and the charts. And the point I want to make is that the advance of humankind, the advance of the new children. A lot of people say, well, the new children are going to save us. Not necessarily. It depends on how we can show them how to, it depends on our showing them what to do with anger. That's where it hangs. Let me tell you why it hangs there. I'm going to tell you about the temporal lobes. The temporal lobes are about here in the brain. They're called the wings of the brain. The temporal lobes represent the highest and best development in the human family. The temporal lobes, right in here and winging right out there, that's the seat of judgment, morals, empathy, compassion, and well-being. That's your temporal lobes, right into here. A lot of the kids now are being born with protrusions in the temporal lobe areas. Not all of them, but many of them. You can recognize it by this forehead that just rounds right out and then comes right in to here, in between, right here at the nose level. So they've got this real rounded, protruded forehead. That's the temporal lobes. But even if they have a flat forehead, they could still have an advancement in the temporal lobe development. This is where we're going as a society. This is where we want to go as a society. This is the advanced development of the human being, is to develop the temporal lobes. Now, the new kids are coming in with advancements in temporal lobe development. Here's where it hangs. This is the catch. There's always a catch. Here's the catch. It is the mother's state while carrying the child that determines the brain her child will have. Let me say that again. It is the mother's state while carrying a child that determines the brain her child will have. That's not necessarily her attitude, although it can be. It's her emotional state. And it's not necessarily what you think it is. Everything hinges on the perception of safety. There's your key. Safety. If the mother feels safe, remember DNA is always communicating with each other, and that little fetus in there, and the little DNA, and the little brain in there says, oh, things are safe. We can develop the higher brain. We can develop the prefrontal. But if the mother feels in danger, or her environment is dangerous or unsafe, then those little DNA in there and the little brain in there says, oh, we got to survive, got to survive. So they'll develop the reptilian brain. It'll go the other way. Either the high brain or the more ancient low brain. And it all hinges on the perception of safety, just safety. Certainly a mother with great attitude and, you know, she's meditating and she's really into spirituality, that helps. But that's not the hinge. The hinge is safety. A safe environment means it's okay for the brain to develop the prefrontals. Angry, fearful environments mean the brain needs to switch to baser modes of development for survival. Okay? The first 3 years of life are the most important for the perception of safety. Puberty is the second most important time for the perception of safety. The brain does not mature until you're about 25 years old. Forget about the age of 18 or 21 when you're supposed to be an adult. You're not an adult until you're about 25 or 26. Okay, I've made my point. Now I want to go back to one of the first things I said when we got together again. In the Arabic countries, over 50% are under the age of 25. Are we creating the next jihadists? Look, folks, these new kids are everywhere. That doesn't mean that in the Arabic countries they're not just as smart as they are over here. Geniuses. This is global. This is not the United States. This is global. What are we doing, or what can we do, where it comes to the perception of safety so that the brain will develop the prefrontals? Okay, this is December last year. It was announced on WINA radio. Ambassador Hal, who was our former ambassador to Kuwait, just revealed then, December 6, 2006, a study that was done by the Arabic people in the Arabic countries. So it's not our study, it's their study. And they are finding that young Muslims today in the Arabic countries are more conservative than their elders. They are less tolerant under their direction than before. This applies across the board. The younger the individual, the more strident, even the more brutal. What is happening to the prefrontals? Let me go on just a little bit more. Let me say to you that even in Russia, Putin is taking advantage now of the young people, the teenagers, the ones in their early 20s, and he has created the Nashai. Let's see if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yes, Putin's shock force. And how's that spelled? N-A-S-H-I, Nashai. And it is the job of the Nashai to threaten and brutalize anyone who is against Putin's idea of patriotism. They are following in the steps of the Nazi brown shirts. So we're not just talking about the Arabic countries, we're also talking about Russia. We're talking about all kinds of places. Now let me surprise you and give you a real shock. Let me say to you that the hope of the Arabic countries lies in Iran. An interesting thing happened in 1974 with the Iranian Revolution. The government then wanted more patriotism, more people, and they wanted the women to bear more babies. So they started all kinds of incentives so that the women would be encouraged to have more and more children. These were precious to Iran. These were the children of our future that will carry Iran into the greatest of countries. These children were loved. These children were wanted. These children were respected. These children were, they wanted these kids. Talk about an environment of safety. They had it and then some. So throughout all of the 80s, remember the floodgate opened in about 1982, maybe sooner than that in Iran, up until 1990, that decade of the 80s in Iran produced, I don't know how many, but a lot of people with advanced prefrontal development. You know it now by the few of us, our reporters, who are able to get in Iran and talk to these young people, and they're saying they don't like what's going on, they want to change things, they talk just like the new kids, they are the new kids, they are advanced prefrontal development for that period of time. All of the new kids, or most of the new kids, most of the children of Iran. And I say to you again, the hope of the Arabic world lies in Iran. And remember, a lot of Iran has the X haplotype. They're not just Persians. They're the Xers. We don't know where they originated, and they don't know either, most of them. They've blanked that out of their mind. Isn't that fascinating? What is happening today? This to me is just absolutely powerful. Okay, let's go over some of these plates. How long do I have? Till 4, isn't it? Yeah, I have a little bit of time here. Let's look at the March of Generations. This is in the United States, but it applies somewhat worldwide. 1901 to by the way, I'm a generational researcher, to 1924, that's the G.I. Joes. You know, this is based on statistical research, not just mine. But I went deeper into the energy signatures than most of the others. These are the builders. Their energy signature. Do you know what an energy signature is? It's that underlying energy pattern that comes in with that wave of people. It's the underlying energy pattern that supports that wave of souls entering the earth plane during that particular time frame. You got it? Okay. It has both negative and positive aspects. The positive aspect is perseverance. The negative is stubbornness. Have you ever tried to change your grandfather or your great-grandfather? Do you know what I mean by stubbornness? They built this nation, and, you know, they're not going to take any guff. Okay, 1925 to 1942, the silence or the caregivers. There's never been a president in the United States come from the generation of silence. We never produced a president. The positive is compassion. By the way, these were the years when psychotherapy, psychiatry were born, psychology were born, during the time of the silence. And disillusionment, the negative. By the way, I'm a silent. I think there's probably a number of silents here. 1943 to 1960, these are the boomers. You're hearing a lot about boomers now. They're the rebels of our generation, generational march. And of course, enthusiasm is the positive, selfishness is the negative. They're the ones that brought us AIDS. You know, the sexual revolution and AIDS. They also brought us this incredible enthusiasm and desire and hunger for spirituality. The biggest push of that came during the time of the boomers. 1961 to 1981, that's Generation X. These are the survivors. They're often called the lost generation, the latchkey kids. Of all the generations, that's the one where the most abortions were performed and the most suicides were committed that we know of so far. Their signature, resourcefulness on the positive, the negative, suicide and depression, self-condemnation. You just kind of stop and think for a minute. This is the generation where the most abortions were performed that we know of. Why would they condemn themselves? They don't like to be parents. They don't like children, most of them. I'm not saying they all do, of course not. But as a generality, they're still punishing themselves for not being good enough for their parents to want to keep them. It's a real interesting study as to why they turned on themselves. Okay, by the way, I have a Generation X in my family, and I can say for sure she's now in her middle 40s, and you can see that pattern very clearly in her. 1982 to 2001 are the millennials. 1982, the big jump, the floodgates opened. That generation has ended. You know, up to about 2001, the millennials, these are the fixers. They came here to fix things. Their signature, tolerance, and the negative is anger. That's the generational marker for all of them, is anger. Some, of course, are more angry than others. That anger, a peculiar impatience. Then the new ones are coming in, about 1982 to 2024. I call these the 911s because they all carry that pattern or that imprint of September 11. And I mean globally, not just in the United States. By the way, the millennials, before I completely leave them, this is the first generation globally in all history to grow up in a global village. None of the others did. That began with the millennials. Now we're into the 911s, the adapters. These new little ones are very different from the millennials. Adaptability, certainly, but look at the negative, fear and insecurity. And you can see how that can be. If you've flown and you've been through security, if you're going to a school and they have a lot of police and security, and you know, I can go on and on and on about what we're doing in losing our freedoms, many of them, security, insecurity. Yes, these kids are growing up with that. 2025 to 2043, projecting ahead, I call these the Aquarians or the Universalists. This is the first generation in modern history, certainly. I didn't go all the way back, so I can't say it goes all the way back, but it certainly goes back as far as I was able to do for this particular talk and in the book. It is the first generation to have the planet Pluto all in one sign for all of their birthing years. The millennials had the planet Pluto, which is the generational planet, in 3 signs during its birthing years. Went through 3 signs. The Aquarians is the first and only that I was able to find where Pluto was in the sign of Aquarius for all of the birthing years. That's why I call them the universalists, the positive humanitarian, the negative instability and crisis. I truly feel that 2029 begins the first beginnings of the Age of Aquarius. We're not to Aquarius yet. And if you think you are, I challenge you. We're not there yet. I don't think the Age of Aquarius will really be in force till about 2033. There's a lot of good astrologers whom I respect deeply that feel not until about 2400. But at least 2133 or so, when we're really in the Age of Aquarius. But certainly we get a good taste of it by 2025. We're not there at all yet. We think we are, but we're not. Okay, how do you diffuse millennial anger? Let's talk about this briefly at least. Won't spend a lot of time on it. This also is in the book. I have a whole chapter on the new kids and their anger because it's so important. Teach anger management, mediation skills beginning in grade school. Please, beginning in grade school. From 4th grade on, enact honesty codes, class courts. Let the kids do it. They're good. Listen to these kids. Let the kids talk. Let them investigate the problem and to discern and vote and carry out decisions. They'll be fair. All they need is a guide, i.e. the teacher or an adult of some kind. They can police themselves, and they'll do a better job of it than the teachers will. Have special sessions on dealing with class bullies and the best type of defense to use. Instigate timeout or discussion periods. The kids are getting antsy or, hard to control. Initiate timeout. Sit down and talk to them. Listen to them. Use respectful language even when arguing. Honor good nutrition, exercise, fresh air and play, engage in sports, music, marching, dance. Remember, the kids are here to do things. They would want to act. So don't just expect them to sit on their little fannies. They don't want to do that. They love to volunteer, get them in animal shelters, senior citizen centers, and so forth. They can regain self-control through massage, yoga, meditation, prayer, especially the arts, any form of creativity. Have a responsible job of some kind where money is earned. Teach them to save at least half of it. Believe me, the new kids must have a tactile response to money. When they're really young and you get them in a store, put the money in the kid's hand. The kid goes up to the clerk, the kid pays for it, the kid gets the money back in their hand, and then they can give it to you. Make sure they're touching money. They must have a tactical response to money. It's because of all the virtual realities. They must have a tactile response to money. If, with their savings account, have the passbook in their hands in their room. They'll grow up respectful and cognizant of the value of money if they have a tactile response to it when young. Not a head trip. Gotta be in the hands. Okay? Remember, I'm a synergist. I took all the different prophecies about the new kids. Well, no, this is something else. This is on their intelligence. We'll go back to that later. This is by Solaria Green of England. This is all based on science, not her channeling. This is the new arrangement of intelligence. Remember, there are 5 types. Notice that there are 5 types of intelligence. We're all acquainted with the first one, your IQ, mental, its thoughts connected to the individual. A lot of you know about emotional intelligence. There's been books out on that for some time. It is your EQ, emotional intelligence, where you're opening to others. Then you have your spiritual intelligence, which is your SQ. That measures wisdom, connecting with higher self and higher purpose. We have holistic intelligence, which is your WQ. That is your innate telepathy, your knowing, connecting profoundly with others and with potential. And your quantum intelligence, or your QQ. Don't you love these initials? This is your hyperspeed bandwidth in the sense of nanoseconds. Super creativity, connecting with allness. Now the catch here is a significant number of the new children fit SQ through QQ, spiritual intelligence through quantum. This is why parents and teachers are in such a quandary. Intelligence beyond what can be measured with standard IQ tests is considered fiction. And that's where most of the kids are. Right now. Not going to happen. It already has happened. It's here now. No, I'm not going to put that. Yes. Is that in the book? No, that is not in the book. That's in extras. Well, no, that is in the book. Sorry, that is in the book. Sorry about that. This also is in the book, where I synergized all the different prophecies. I was going to talk about it before, where I synergized all the different prophecies about root races. Now, let's stop for just a minute here and talk about root races. What is a root race? A root race is our gene pool. Has nothing to do with whether you're black, green, purple, or red. It is our gene pool as human beings, our genetic gene pool. A root race, R-O-O-T, root race. Now, according to various prophecies and esoteric traditions, whether you're going back to the ancient Vedic prophecies, or you're turning to the more common modern Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. Doesn't matter which direction you go, or if you go through the Algonquins, or if you go through the Ojibwe, or you go through our great masters that lived in around the Crimean Sea. Doesn't matter where you go, whether you're going to oral history, or if you're going to the more recorded types of history. You find the same kind of knowing, that recognition that there seems to be a pattern, a great plan. Many people call it God's great plan for the development of the human being on the earth plane. And that it would go through 7 major cycles, or 7 major waves. We get the term root race from the Vedics. We also get it from Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. We also get it from many other different groups. So don't just go to one source if you're going to read about root races. Please go to as many as you can. Also look for life waves or life streams. It's the same thing as a root race. Now these waves of souls that came in during these epochs of time came in to fulfill that particular pulse or that particular need in the earth plane and in the human family. So the comings and goings of root races, we're covering tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. So a root race doesn't come and go within a couple of decades. So you're all, I hope we're all on the same page with that. Now the idea of colors comes from vibratory measurements or levels or ratios of energy. They're vibrating mostly to that energy pattern. That doesn't mean that you can't have ascended masters come in any time. That doesn't mean that you can't have advanced beings come in at any time. What we're looking at here is the generality. Getting tongue-tied here. We're looking at the basic whole for that time frame. So the red race represents that entry into the earth plane of souls bent on survival of the species. So we're going back a long way when we're talking about the red race or the red root race. The orange root race is the astral beings. Remember, Cayce talked about them. Lots of people talked about those beings who were more ethereal in form. They weren't solid like we are. The astral, the invisible blueprints, inner guidance, heightened senses, very psychic, very intuitive, would manifest from the ethers in an easier way than we do now. It's also the job, the comings and goings of these root races. Each root race changes the physical form of the human being or at that time. So each root race then changes and alters our bodies, the body physical. It changes with each one. And each one, their job, according to prophecy and tradition, is to then overspread across the world that corresponding chakra. So the energy and the purpose and the dynamics of that chakra. So with the first one, it would be the first chakra, the root chakra. The second one, the second chakra, and so forth. It is the job of each root race then to develop the energies of that chakra throughout the world. Each root race brings with it not only a change in body type and chakra development, but each root race has its own Noah, its own Adam, and its own Messiah. Okay, so we get that sense then of these huge waves of souls coming in. They significantly change what's going on in the earth plane. Okay, we get to the yellow, the third root race. Finally, the development of the third chakra. This is the intellect, concrete decision-making and personal will. We get into the green mental abstract, or the Buddhic level, where we're finally awakening to spirit, initial enlightenment, the enlarged worldview. And we get into the blues, which is higher intuition. Higher intuition is with the blues, not the indigos. Your atmic, self as an individual, knowing and wisdom. Finally, indigos, inspiration, the monadic, fully individuated, the individual whole. And then finally what caps off the development, the violet, state of consciousness, totally spiritual, aligned with soul power, surrendered to God's will. So you get that sense then that there might be a plan for all of this. When we talk about great quantum leaps in the human family, when we're talking about the entry of the root races, we're talking about something that is massive. Where are we now in our development? We're here. The fifth root race, the blues. Not indigos, the blues. But what is so remarkable about what's happening now is the blues as an entire root race are going into ascension. That's where you're getting your acceleration. Ascension is just simply acceleration, advancement. They're advancing off the charts. We have the privilege now today to see something that is so remarkable. None of any members in our family tree never got a chance to see this, not even for thousands of years back. We are seeing the fulfillment, the full fulfillment of an entire root race happening in our time. That's why I get so excited about what's happening now with the root races. The overspreading is just awesome. I indicated that each root race has its own Noah, its own Adam, and its own Messiah. I have indicated to you that we are now at the time of the fifth root race. I think we've been there for a while, but the root race is now accelerating. It's moving into ascension. I believe that our Noah is here now. I believe our Noah is a man, currently manifested. And our Noah for the fifth root race, I believe, is Nelson Mandela. What is the job of a Noah? To save the best. What did Nelson Mandela do? He gave us forgiveness and reconciliation. And I'll tell you folks, we're not going anywhere into any kind of advancement until we learn what our Noah has been trying to teach us. Forgiveness and reconciliation. Okay, let's take a look at the fives. So let's take a look at what's jumping. We're jumping into fives. Those of you who are numerologists are just going to go cuckoo with this one. We're in now the fifth world, where polarities shift. We're in the fifth root race, which is blue, the fifth element, which is ether, the fifth chakra, which is willpower. Did you know what the big challenge is of the fifth chakra, which is your throat chakra? It's power over or power to. We learned that one, and we can move on. Have we learned it yet? We'll pick up a newspaper and you tell me. Power over or power to. The fifth brain, did you know we have 5 brains? We do. The fifth one is the heart. I'll show you in a minute. We now have 5 brainwave frequencies. We were all taught, that there is delta and theta and alpha and beta. Sorry, folks, there's also gamma. I've been saying for a long time that high beta, i.e. gamma, is absolutely incredible. I meditate in high beta or gamma on occasion and low delta on occasion. You can bliss out either direction. In fact, your gamma or high beta is your true Zen. We're moving into the fifth dimension, free from time, space, states, intention rules in the fifth dimension. The fifth ray, which is Venus or mercy, we're moving into the days of the divine feminine. Mary Magdalene, Kuan Yin, whether you like her or not, Hillary Clinton. We can go on and on and on about the powerful women that are now flexing their muscles. The fifth communication wave, which is personal computers. The 5 senses are now shifting into higher modes. They are expanding and enlarging constantly. 5 types of intelligence, we've already gone over that. By the way, 5 is the number of mankind or humankind. 5 represents change and progress if you're into numerology. The 14th generation, which is where the floodgate opened, the big jump occurred, is the 14th generation, the number 5. Millennials, the shift generation in the age of shift. This is on the extras. In the extras, it's not in the book, unfortunately. We've already gone over the types of intelligence. Now let's look at the brain. The heart creates an electromagnetic field around us that is identical to that of Earth. 60 to 65% of heart cells are actually the same type of neural cells that are located in the brain. In the new science of neurocardiology, it considers the heart to be our 5th brain, the 5th brain structure. The other structures are reptilian, limbic, neocortex, and prefrontal lobes. The heart is really the highest. It is not just a pump. It is not just a seat of love. It is a literal brain. Do you suppose that might be why people who have heart transplants begin to take on the characteristics of the donor? Okay. Let's look at the 5th element. Ether. We're no longer into water, air, earth, and fire. We've now moved into another one. It's called ether. It is the realm of patterns and causality. All manifests from the ether. All thoughts, feelings, actions are recorded upon the ether. The Akashic records, written upon the skeins of time, are located in the ether. The ether is now opening up to everybody. Yes, very often the fields, right? The higher fields of existence, the 5th dimension. Let's look at these dimensions. The 1st through the 3rd have to do with the laws of time and space. The 4th dimension includes the astral and etheric planes. It's the 5th dimension that frees us from time-space dynamics while enabling us to weave our intentions directly into the fabric of what we want to manifest. Nothing is hidden in the 5th dimension. All is revealed. Intention directs movement and manifestation in this dimension. We're finally getting into instantaneous or physical manifestation through the mind, through the heart, in the 5th dimension. Here we've got our communication waves. The first one was verbal communication, sign language. Second one, the use of the stelae, inscriptions on markers, stones, pillars, flat surfaces, and walls. The third was the invention of papyrus, a paper-like material used for writing on scrolls, ancient documents. Fourth was printing from movable type, the first book, the Gutenberg Bible. But the personal computer was introduced, guess what, in 1982. The very year the new children began to enter the earth plane en masse. The millennial generation. Just a little briefie here on gamma waves. For those of you who've been teaching your students all about the 4 brain waves, you got to start teaching them now about 5, not 4. And look at gamma waves. High beta, 25 to 60 hertz, modulate perception and consciousness, relate to simultaneous processing of information from different brain areas, involve memory, learning abilities, integrated thoughts, information-rich task processing. This is where you get into the nanoseconds. This is where you get into wholeness. This is where you get into oneness. This is where you get into that sense of Zen, where suddenly you become. My husband loves to play basketball in Zen. He gets into that state of Zen. He becomes the basketball, he becomes the hoop, and he becomes the floor. And once he has made that connection, and it's all one, he cannot miss a basket. There's no way you can miss the basket. You're getting into gamma. So those of you who are teaching psychic development and all these other wonderful things, please update your curriculum. There's one other, and I have just enough time to make it. Okay. And I can make it in just a few moments. What's going to work now? What's going to make a difference in our lives now is how much we can appreciate the power of now. Not one, now. The power of now, in simple terms, is a return to the natural state of conscious awareness and clarity, where polarities fuse and holons result. It is a natural synchronicity that vibrates at 40 cycles per second. It's in gamma. It is the brainwave pattern termed high beta, or the Zen of mergence, where that which resonates together joins together. Welcome to the now.